Okay, this is gonna be a casual discussion to keep you guys busy while I work on some more important projects. You know what I haven't done in over a year? A video recapping some ridiculous cartoon community discourse. And indeed, this will bear some similarities to the whole buy one get one free debate of 2024, because this topic of discussion will be the battle between Camp Kidney Bean Mouth and Camp Candy Cane Lane. In other words, are cartoons better when they stay perfectly on model, or when they push the expression so far that their distance could match the amount of meters Usain Bolt ran for? This seems to be a flavor of discourse that's always prevalent in this community, but I'm specifically looking at two recent cases that happened this fall regarding Big City Greens and another concerning SpongeBob SquarePants. So grab a drink and a snack, sit back, relax, open up your favorite drawing program if you want to doodle along with me, and enjoy. Let's establish the Big City Greens side of things first. When I signed into Twitter on October 1st, 2025, I saw one of my followers, Frankie Z, mention about some recent controversy involving Big City Greens' art style of all things. Immediately, I was like, oh great, another instance of somebody posting a tweet, most likely a hot take, and people in the cartoon community were prompted to launch quote tweet after quote tweet, reply after reply, dunking on that poor unfortunate soul for said hot take. It didn't take me long to find the source of this non-controversy, and at its core, this is yet another anti-bean mouth cartoon situation, as if we haven't moved on from the whole thing with Hayden on Elio, which I'm sure will be a good movie once I check it out. So a very talented cartoon artist I'm following, known as Stuffs, wrote a now deleted tweet criticizing Disney Channel's surprisingly long-running animated series Big City Greens for having a stylistically bland animation/art style, and apparently the fandom of the show was so offended by his comments that he received harsh backlash. Technically, the tweet was posted on the 29th of September, so it must have slipped past my radar back then, but it wasn't until the following days when the discourse really got erupting. On one side, there were people who agreed with Stuffs that Big City Greens' art style is largely unimpressive, but they don't come in the same flavor. For every person who dislikes the style, while still being capable of finding enjoyment in the show itself, there are those who strongly detest it, with one tweet, which was also deleted, trying to use a page from the show's storyboarding guide in order to validate Stuff's opinion by pointing out how Big City Green's style guide allegedly forbids the animators, storyboarders, and special posers to push the characters' expressions to display an extra bit of energy. As for the responses that disagreed with the alleged blandness of how Big City Greens looks, some of them took it a little too personally. In fact, one reply that Stuffs highlighted is basically saying that you might have some quote skeletons in the closet if you criticize a modern Disney television animation series for its art style alone. On paper, it may be possibly brushed off as a way of saying the old man is yelling at clouds again, but given some of the other replies I've seen in this discourse, I personally interpret this as an accusation of supporting a certain controversial creator of a certain controversial 90s Nicktoon. Don't worry, I'll go much further into that argument later. Now, there were tweets that serve as good counter-arguments, whether they're sharing screenshots from the series depicting characters like Cricket and Gloria with some wonderfully unhinged expressions, or in the case of former Owl House crew member Rebecca Rose, explaining the true intentions of a cartoon style guide. She pointed out that model packs are not inherently meant to 100% restrict the artist, but rather to serve as reminders of what does or does not fit the show style. I appreciate this professional response, and yeah, it makes sense what Rebecca said, because even a cartoon like Ren and Stimpy, known for its always changing expressions, has to maintain some sense of consistency. Like, you shouldn't draw Stimpy with a tail, for instance. Although with Ren, it's completely optional. So was all of this debating over one cartoon lover's simple opinion needed to happen? Not really. Stuffs had no intention whatsoever to directly insult the Big City Greens fandom, but he said that he didn't like how the show looks. While I'm not a die-hard fan who's seen every single episode, I really enjoy Big City Greens myself, and the art style consistent of these bug-eyed, noseless, jelly bean-colored Simpsons rejects, as the nostalgia critic would put it, that helped me get engaged with this story about a farmer family living in the big city. With that being said, while I disagree with stuff that the show's art style sucks, no way am I gonna request to have the hounds released to sick him, Mr. Burns style. You know why? Cause it is just an opinion on how a children's cartoon is drawn. Nothing too serious, but Stuffs ended up apologizing for his controversial statement anyway, and some folks were like, no, it's okay dude, you're only human. Don't let them oversensitive Big City Greens fans spoil your cooking. And yeah, I'm happy that Stuffs is doing just fine following the backlash, and he's continuing to put out some fantastic art. Seriously, if you love cartoony goodness like SpongeBob and Billy and Mandy, this guy has the stuff to meet your needs. Pun intended. But speaking of SpongeBob, yeah, let's move on to the second part of this discussion. Before we do, however, I'd like to remind you to hit the like button if you're enjoying this so far, subscribe for more cartoon nerdiness like this, and hit the bell so you won't miss them. Also, please consider supporting me on Ko-fi, where you can commission me a cartoon drawing or review of your choice, and buy my recent ebook about my original characters. Thanks! Yeah, so this video was originally gonna be mainly about the Big City Greens fandom's temper tantrum, with a short mention about the unfortunate amount of condescending glances that more cartoony styles get. But with this latest edition of, oh no, SpongeBob's trying too hard to make new meme faces again, I'm gonna have to spend a little more time than I anticipated with addressing this debate, speaking as someone who predominantly favors expressive cartoons. It wasn't even too long ago when that one Twitter user with the Chris Griffin profile pic caused war to happen for accusing the crew behind the modern seasons of, quote, desperately trying to find the next big meme face. Even trying to shut down Dave Cunningham when the SpongeBob supervising director chimed in to say, no, we're not set on making memes here. Months later, this October, we got another talented artist named Astral Wings complaining that SpongeBob's animation has gone, quote, overstimulated, and is, quote, trying to be Ren and Stimpy. And thus, another Twitter cartoon community copy pasta was born. But unlike Stuffs with his Big City Greens hot take, Astral regrets nothing that he said. Oh well, it's okay. By the way, the clip posted was from a recent episode called Bizarro Bottom, in which they finally let Weird Al Yankovic make a guest appearance. Like, what took the SpongeBob crew so long to have such a fittingly eccentric celebrity as Weird Al be a special guest? Also, while I was finishing up the script, I learned that Bizarro Bottom, or at least that specific scene, was storyboarded by Brian Morante, who apparently did this years before his departure from SpongeBob, most likely to work on his own show, Zuki of Planet Ruby, which still isn't available in Canada as of this writing, despite it being co-produced by Nelvana. But even though he was responding in the simplest and friendliest way possible that he wasn't trying to force anything with SpongeBob's facial expressions, he was still met with some smartass replies from people who very likely have no professional animation knowledge or drawing skills of their own, not unlike when Chris Griffin over here was trying to argue with the show's supervising director. Man, don't you just love it when these so-called animation fans show as much respect for these industry talents as Statler and Waldorf show their respect for Fozzie Bear's comedy? At least when it comes to a production that they personally don't like, thus enforcing some double standards. Like, remember when people were unironically celebrating the cancellation of Velma last year during a hard time for the American animation industry? I mean, it's okay if you hate that show for its writing, but aren't you Velma haters the same people who say that the designs are its one saving grace? So yeah, show more respect for the talents of artists like Adam Faye and Kat Hudson, please. Okay, back to our main discussion. I just want to clarify that nothing is inherently wrong with disliking a particular flavor of animation. If you don't care for cartoons that have a fluffy bean-mouthed exterior like Big City Greens, that's fine. And if cartoons that could come off as over-the-top with their goofy character animation like SpongeBob aren't your cup of tea, that's also fine. However, that doesn't mean there isn't any ignorance to debunk. I have to address this right now. As much as I love the Ren and Stimpy show, as much as I acknowledge its importance in TV animation history, and as much as I myself take immense influence from it for my own cartoon art style, I'm not part of the camp who thinks that literally every single cartoony looking animation made under the sun must automatically be compared to it. Like, no way are people forgetting that the classic Looney Tunes sorts, Tom and Jerry, Tex Avery's MGM cartoons, and any Disney animation by Ward Kimball exists too, right? Respect your elders, damn it! I mean, comparisons to Ren and Stimpy are not bad in and of themselves, especially when they make sense for stuff like Cow and Chicken, The Mighty Bee, and Snookums and Meat especially, but it shouldn't be required. I especially hate it whenever the mere energy of a cartoony cartoon with wacky expressions is being pigeonholed as the John Christopher style, as if that old fart has a monopoly on such cartooniness. Thus, people in this community who openly have a preference for wacky cartoons could be at risk of being labeled as John K supporters, or some pejorative slang for a Spumco fanatic, whether or not they actually condone the bad things John was accused of. Because apparently, other edgy cartoony animators like Danny Antonucci, Joe Murray, Richard Conde, Max Gilardi, Owen Fishback, and many others simply don't ring a bell. It's always Michael's filthy name that's brought up. Hell, if this letterbox review of John's disaster piece, Cans Without Labels, is anything to go by, even the amazing Bob Krampus shorts from Warner Bros. Animated by legends like Rod Scribner, Manny Gold, and Snoopy's own Bill Melendez are in danger of being retroactively seen as nothing but the inspiration for Christopher Lucy's hit or miss career. I mean, it is a fact, for instance, that Stimpy was based on the cats from the early Tweety cartoon A Gruesome Twosome, but there's still no need for pigeonholing this entire style. At least when it comes to making comparisons to Ren and Stimpy specifically, you're indirectly acknowledging the wonderful efforts of other crew members who were better artists and hopefully better human beings than old Johnny Boy, whether it's Bob Camp, Lynn Naylor, Bob Jakes, Kelly Armstrong, the late Chris Riccardi, and Jim Smith, or current SpongeBob showrunner Vincent Waller. But associating it with John alone just feels wrong, not only because of his obviously controversial reputation, but also because he hasn't even made a genuinely great thing ever since he was rightfully fired by Nickelodeon in 1992, with his NBC bumpers and maybe his Yogi Bear shorts being rare exceptions. Like, every now and then I'm reminded of how lousy his Simpsons couch gag was. Now that's what I called overstimulating animation done poorly. As you may know, stuff like Genndy Tartakovsky's recent film Fixed got these reactions from the cartoon community, where they're like, whoa, did John K make this? I even made a meme satirizing this pointless discourse back when the trailers first dropped last July. After all, Genndy himself said that he was influenced more by the classic Warner Bros. And MGM cartoons and Silver Age's Disney films such as Lady and the Tramp and 101 Dalmatians than the Ren and Stimpy show. I know several people from Ren and Stimpy worked on Fixed as well, meaning the comparisons aren't completely unwarranted, but you gotta broaden your horizons, right? With that being said, when this girl said that SpongeBob is, quote, trying to be like Ren and Stimpy, well, great job cracking the case, Sherlock Hemlock. SpongeBob always had some Ren and Stimpy in its DNA, arguably more so than SpongeBob's own raunchier spiritual precursor, Rocko's Modern Life. All the good ex-Ren and Stimpy crew members I listed earlier, with the exception of Jim Smith, worked on SpongeBob at some point in its 25+ year long lifespan. And there are much more too, including the voice of Plankton, Mr. Doug Lawrence. I remember professional Ren and Stimpy expert Sad Komorowski saying in an interview that if an animated TV series from the past 30-something years has held up well to this very day, chances are there are at least 3 or 4 ex-employees from Ren and Stimpy involved in its production. That is a fairly accurate statement, and I can't imagine what TV animation will be like without its impact. So going back to how the modern SpongeBob season look, if you want my honest opinion, I think seasons 9 onward Squidward is the best the show has ever looked since season 4, which was when the expressiveness of the character animation previously peaked with C.H. Greenblatt's final masterpiece, Fear of a Krabby Patty. And you know, that episode itself had a number of wacky faces outdo the so-called on-model faces compared to the first 3 seasons, and yet people in the fandom usually give it praise. Though you could argue, well, at least the actual Raiden in Fear of a Krabby Patty had good humor, while the newer episodes think the wacky faces by themselves are jokes, which I can understand, but I still feel like some double standards need to be pointed out. Oh, and speaking of C.H. Greenblatt, I don't know where else to bring it up, but I am aware that the legend returns to SpongeBob as a storyboard artist on the CGI episode Go Fetch, not to be confused with the cat dog short Fetch, or the character from Fixed. It was sweet knowing that he forgave Nickelodeon after the way the network mistreated his own show, Harvey Beaks. But yeah, while the writing in the episodes themselves isn't always super memorable or hilarious per se, these recent SpongeBob seasons, and by extension the Patrick Star Show as well, is simply gorgeous eye candy that gratifies the cartoony style lover in me. It turned out to be a benefit of the show when it switched from being a storyboard-driven show to a script-driven show in order to make the workflow a bit lighter for the crew. And I must give a shout out to some of the younger animation talents who have been cooking good with their contributions to the artistic side of the newer content in this franchise. Whether they're animators, storyboard artists, character designers, layout artists, or some combination of those positions. I'm talking people like Eliza Herndon, Jennifer Gleason, Chris DeRosa, Ian Vasquez, David Gamil, Gabe Del Valle, Caroline Director, Dylan H. King, and others who I may be forgetting. Thank you for all of your efforts in making SpongeBob and the Patrick Star Show among the best looking TV cartoons in this current decade. Yeah, I really mean it. These are up there with Looney Tunes cartoons, The Proud Family Louder and Prouder, The Wonderful World of Mickey Mouse, The Cuphead Show, The Ghost and Molly McGee, The Clone High Revival, and Smile with Friends as just some of the most eye-catching cartoons that came out on TV or streaming in the 2020s. And yes, all those examples I listed ought to give you an idea of my preferred taste in animation styles. Feel free to judge. Oh, and thank you Dave Cunningham, Vincent Lauer, and Mark Ceccarelli for hiring those newer talents to begin with. Alright, so as you just heard with the stories about people fighting over Big City Green's simplistic art style and the recurrent arguments over the wackiness of SpongeBob's animation since the second movie, you have been reminded, or maybe even learned for the very first time, that the cartoon community is a crowd who's tough to fully satisfy. Do they want their cartoons to stay perfectly on model for at least 90% of the time? Or do they want their cartoons to be as energetically expressive as possible in order to justify its role in this visual medium? Oh yeah, that's another thing. Apparently there are some people who would reject the argument of, who cares if the animation isn't good? Doesn't the writing, characters, voice acting, etc. matter just as much? Honestly, I don't agree with such a rejection because there are numerous examples of animated series where the animation budget isn't very wealthy, but the writing, character personalities, voice acting, and even the designs themselves successfully do the heavy lifting. Early TV classics such as Rocky and Bullwinkle and the better Hanna-Barbera productions like The Flintstones are prime examples of this, as well as later adult cartoons like South Park, Home Movies, and Space Ghost Coast to Coast, among others. Oh, and not to mention internet animations such as Homestar Runner. You get my point, right? And don't get me started on the multiple times I see people lambast the final product of an episode for looking, quote, stale compared to the looser storyboards. Well, it's not actually because I don't want to talk about it, it's more so because this discussion is getting long enough, like longer than I expected, and I want to get to my last key point before wrapping up. However, I will say this. Considering how storyboarding and character layout have become such synonymous positions in modern cartoon production for the most part, there's a higher chance than ever for the final animation drawings in a new SpongeBob episode to retain the same energy as the original storyboard panels, and yet people are still unsatisfied? So yeah, how do you want your cartoons to be animated, Twitter? Isn't there a good example of a cartoon that isn't too restricted with its character movements, but at the same time isn't over the top wacky? In fact, there is a great example of that sweet middle ground. On the same night as me finding Astral Wings' tweet about Martyr SpongeBob's animation being overstimulating, I saw the out of context Simpsons Couch Gags page post the scene near the end of Treehouse of Horror 4, where the family reacts to Bart getting turned into a vampire. In general, that particular era of The Simpsons, back when David Silverman was still heavily involved as an animation director, and Film Roman, RIP, and Rough Draft Korea came together as a powerful duo, was a peak period of the show, justifying its role as not just a cool sitcom, but a cool cartoon sitcom. With Treehouse of Horror 4 specifically, I agree with Bob, Henry, and Ian Jones-Cordy on the Talkin' Simpsons podcast that this is one of the best looking episodes in the 35-plus-year-old series' run. I'm slightly more fond of the bit where Homer screams at the painting of dogs playing poker, but there's no doubt that the other scene was wonderfully staged and laid out with character poses that are strong, appealing, funny, and complement the humor occurring. Seriously, if you want to make an animated adult sitcom that doesn't totally undermine the fact that it's a cartoon, without necessarily going all Tex Avery with the wackiness, study the classic Simpsons seasons, the Butterfinger commercials, some music videos, and dare I say, the Tracy Ullman shorts. And also take notes from the styles of some other 90s/adult cartoons, as well as Smiling Friends. Don't just go for the plain old Seth MacFarlane look that many of these writer-driven adult cartoons seem to emulate, even though, as I see people on Twitter point out, Seth MacFarlane himself is arguably a more talented cartoonist than Matt Groening whenever he has the time to doodle one of his Family Guy characters or do a single-panel gag cartoon resembling the cutaway gags. These honestly look even more appealing than the current episodes of either Family Guy or American Dad. But anyway, the subject on how The Simpsons animation style and other adult cartoons typically look these days is another one for another day. This casual discussion has gotten long enough and I wanna wrap up. Bottom line, whether it's concerning B-mouth cartoons that Zoomers and Gen Alpha are in love with, or wacky cartoons that may give someone Vietnam War style flashbacks to the fact that SpongeBob existed, animation Twitter discourse like this is typically ridiculous. Why can't we all just get along? And speaking of getting along, please remember to do so amongst each other as I let you continue this conversation in the comment section down below. What do you folks think about everything discussed today? Do you think Big City Green's art style could have been better, or is it fine the way it is? Has SpongeBob's animation gotten too, quote, overstimulating to enjoy the newer episodes? Do you agree that it's a shame cartoony cartoons are in danger of being seen as nothing more than stuff that's reminiscent of Johnny Boy's work? Lastly, is it really fair to compare Big City Green's storyboards to the ones done for Food Fight of all things? And as always, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a pencil emoji in the comments to confirm that you watched this until the very end. Thanks for watching and take care!